Look at all these. I made hundreds of photos here. You can see that compositionally he's not really placed on any of the rule of thirds intersections. He's sort of almost in the center. And you know what? This is fine. Now, at the time, I was still shooting with the Panasonic Lumix Micro Four Thirds cameras, but they're just not good in low light. Hey, Mitchell here. I hope that you had a great holiday break. Meanwhile, I'm still here making these deep photo analysis videos that'll reveal the ingredients of powerful photos. In this video, the focus will be on what can contribute to the sense of atmosphere and mood in a photo. But I'll also show you how to not make the photo only about the atmosphere and the mood, how to make it engaging and have a human element. Oh, and there will be a few tips on how to make the most of photographing festivals whenever we'll have a chance to attend them again. Now, I'm releasing this video and another one soon to accompany the launch of my new educational resource, The Photographer's Mindset. In it, there are extended versions of these videos, a 200-page digital book, and 50 minutes of podcast-like audio lessons. Let me begin by telling you about this festival and leading to the story of how this photo came to life. So, before the pandemic, I got a chance to witness one of the most fascinating and impressive festivals in South America, 𝗧𝗃𝗃𝗃, the Festival of Snow and Stars. It's held annually in the high Andes in the Cusco region of Peru. 𝗧𝗃𝗃 is what you could call a syncretic religious festival. Its ancient roots lay in an indigenous celebration of the appearance of a star constellation that's associated with the upcoming harvest and new year. But the Catholic Church later had its influence too, and was hoping to replace the indigenous celebrations with its own myths and legends. Instead, the festival has become a mix of traditions, celebrated by different groups for different reasons, and it survives even today. The pilgrimage part of this event is what I instantly got to see and to experience, as I joined some tens of thousands of pilgrims at the town of Ocongaté. From there, we followed a narrow, crumbling mountain path. It's 8 kilometers on foot or horse to the site of the celebration. The whole way is at over 4,000 meters above sea level. I left late in the afternoon and got there at night. The next morning, I was ready to do some intense photography, and that's what I did for the next 4 days. What was I looking to photograph? Initially, there wasn't anything specific. I just wanted to explore as much as possible and to orientate myself. So I photographed everything. And look, often this way of shooting doesn't yield great results because you're only reacting to what you come across and you're using your instincts without any prior knowledge of what to expect. But after about one full day, I started to see patterns. I understood where the action would be at certain times of day and where the light would be. I developed a sort of a routine, letting the action and the light guide me in my decisions. I want to share this routine, my thought process, my creative process, to give you a better idea of how to make the most of festivals photographically. So during mornings, I wanted to make photos in the morning light, but only the higher part of the festival grounds would be illuminated. Coincidentally, this was the location of the chapel where all of the groups of pilgrims would come to dance. The area was full of action from about 7 a.m. till late morning. Plenty of opportunities to photograph all the different faces, the costumes and the colors of 𝗧𝗃𝗃𝗃. I'd make sure to come here every day and I'd stick around as long as things were happening. But I would also keep my eye on anything else that was fascinating to photograph in the area, like this mass on an elevation above the chapel, or these people coming back from the chapel after dancing there. I'd rest in my tent during most of the midday hours, making relatively few frames, but still making some whenever something would catch my eye on the way to the tent or around the tent. Then in the afternoon, I would chase the last rays of sunlight. Much of the valley would be in the shadow of a mountain by about 3 p.m, so I'd have to go up again. And this is again where most of the action would be. until sunset. When it would get dark, there would be certain places where people would light candles and dance. I got to know where these places were, and I'd visit them in the hopes of getting something special. When there wasn't much happening at any of my usual locations, I'd go towards the path that I walked to get to the festival grounds. There was a constant flow of pilgrims and photographic opportunities there at any time of day. This is also where many of the vendors and the food stalls were, and there was always something happening there. Throughout my stay, I would look for isolated moments, for faces, for characters. I'd look for ways to photograph them away from the visual chaos of the festival. This wasn't an easy task at a gathering of tens of thousands of people, but I did get some images like the ones that you're seeing. I actually show you and explain in depth how I got one of these photos in the digital book that's part of the photographer's mindset, which I've already mentioned I'm launching. This is that photo, and it's also the cover of the book. Anyway, as I started to settle into this little routine of mine, I found out that on the second last morning of the festival, there would be a huge gathering at the bottom of the glacier that towered above the festival grounds. So once again, I joined the pilgrims. It was dark, really cold, and we were moving up in altitude. I don't remember the path being very steep, but because we were at over 5,000 meters, so because of the altitude, I felt like I had a weight attached to every one of my limbs. I chewed coca leaves because they help with altitude, and they did help, but I still needed to stop every now and then just to catch my breath. Finally, we arrived at a wide, flat area below the glacier. This is where I'd make the photo that I'm gonna talk about. It was hard to gather myself and to figure out where to be for photos within this limited amount of time. I was exhausted and I was feeling incredibly cold. The amazing photographic potential here was obvious. Everything felt magical, but it was all new again, and I could only experiment and guess where the best place for me to capture something special would be. I just wanted to take a breather and to warm my hands around the candles. But the sun would soon rise, and what was special about this scene, what was magical, would disappear. So I gathered all of my remaining energy and started making photos. Okay, so that's the story behind the festival and behind how I got to making this photo. Now, do you want to see something crazy? Look at all these. I made hundreds of photos here. In total, there were 707 frames. I was so exhausted and so disorientated by the time that I got to this area. But because I knew that there was something potentially really special here, I just had to summon all of my energy and to make myself make photos. So I just kind of started shooting, and that's what I'm doing. I'm making myself make photos. But of course, 707, that's still a lot of images. And there are a few reasons for that. I'll go into all of the reasons in depth in the extended version of this video, which is part of the photographer's mindset resource. In the extended version, I also go in detail into the different photos that work on some level. I'll tell you what does work in them and what doesn't, and I'll explain what made me choose this one. In this video, let's get right to what makes this photo a powerful one. So, what works here? The main thing here is the atmosphere, the strong sense of mood. The darkness is in large part what makes this photo work. There's a sense of mystery. What hides in the darkness? Sometimes not revealing something is actually far more interesting and powerful than showing absolutely everything. Well, you get the point. And the darkness is why it was so important for me to make this photo before the sun came up. One very practical thing that the darkness does is it hides much of the visual chaos. During the day, some elements here would be distracting. There would be so many more colors here. These flags would be quite colorful and attention-grabbing, but all of these things which would be distracting in daylight, they've been sort of drained of color. The only part of the frame which has something close to vivid color is just the part of this guy's jacket. With much of the scene in the darkness, here nothing grabs our attention that shouldn't grab our attention. I wanted to include this dark part here, just to create a bit more breathing room, negative space in the frame, and this allowed the little brighter parts, illuminated by the candles, to be emphasized even more. Speaking of the candles, they're just as important as the darkness. The warm light emanating from them adds so much to the atmosphere. Amidst the darkness, these candle lights feel so cozy and warm. I should also note that under no circumstances should you use a flash in such situations, because obviously you will absolutely kill that ambience. You can see there are many candles all over the frame. There's repetition, rhythm. In the book, I refer to this part as a sort of a visual symphony, a song, a poem of the pilgrims. Now, what role does this young man play here? Well, even with all of these things that I just talked about, I mean, it's nice to have the atmosphere and the mood, but there would not really be enough, in my opinion, to create a truly powerful photo. What I needed was to find a focal point, an anchor to the image. Have a look at these photos here. There's also a very strong sense of atmosphere, but there's no focal point to keep coming back to. So they're sort of not that engaging. This young man is the focal point, the anchor. We can keep coming back to him to kind of relate to the rest of the frame. Now, at times when I'm documenting life, I avoid photos with direct eye contact. But here I quite like that he's looking into the lens. He becomes the human window into this mystical scene. If I turn on the grid, you can see that compositionally he's not really placed on any of the rule of thirds intersections. He's sort of almost in the center. And you know what? This is fine. It makes sense that as an anchor of the image, he's in a very prominent position, at the same time not being completely in the center. So that's it. Those are the things that make this photo work, that make it powerful. Now to the gear and the settings that I used. All the gear and the settings, by the way, are there for each and every one of the 37 photos in the digital book, because I know that some of you just love this stuff and want to know every little detail. At the time, I was still shooting with the Panasonic Lumix Micro Four Thirds cameras, but they're just not good in low light. Luckily, I had a Sony a6500 with me. Still a cropped sensor, but just good enough in the dark. The lens. My Sony 35mm f1.8 lens for the cropped sensor Sony cameras was actually the widest lens that I had for this camera at the time. So this is what I used to capture as much of the scene as possible. While generally I use aperture priority, here I wanted to be more precise. So I was in full manual mode. The ISO was a crucial detail here. I set it to 6400, which in most cases was about the limit for acceptable, not too grainy results with this camera. At ISO 6400, I could set the shutter to 1/30th of a second. This let me avoid motion or camera shake blur in most of the images that I shot at this setting. And here are all of my settings, and here's the image again. Well, that's the end of another video. I'm not uploading a video next week as I'm taking a little break, but I am uploading one the week after, which will also be the final week of the launch of the photographer's mindset. Meaning that it'll also be the last week to get it at a substantially reduced price. Thanks so much for your time. I hope that you're having a nice break yourselves, and goodbye for now.